The mountains, once symbols of eternity, are changing in real time. Glaciers that took millennia to form are melting in decades. The mountains are changing, not over centuries, now within one generation. Where thick ice layers once covered entire valleys, only meltwater and debris remain. Classic climbing routes that existed for thousands of years have vanished in a single summer. The Matterhorn structure is weakening. Mont Blanc's routes are collapsing. Ice climbs in the Alps, Andes, and Himalayas, legendary lines that defined alpinism, no longer exist. The mountains aren't disappearing from maps, but they're transforming into something fundamentally different. And climbers are witnessing it in real time, watching the symbols of eternity reveal how fragile our world truly is. The mountains are changing. The video opens with sweeping aerial views of mountain ranges, the Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes. Majestic peaks rising into blue skies, snow-covered, slopes gleaming in sunlight. But look closer. Where glaciers once flowed in thick, unbroken sheets of ice, you now see exposed rock, dark streaks of debris, streams of meltwater cutting through what should be solid ice. Compare satellite images from 30 years ago to today. The difference is shocking. Glaciers have retreated hundreds of meters, ice fields have thinned dramatically, some have disappeared entirely. The mountains, once symbols of eternity, are changing in real time. Not over geological timescales, not over centuries, now, within a single generation. Climbers who summited peaks in the 1990s return today and barely recognize the roots. Ice that seemed permanent has melted. Rock that was buried under glaciers for millennia now lies exposed. This isn't a distant future scenario. This is happening right now, every summer, accelerating with each passing year. The urgency is undeniable. The reality is inescapable, and the transformation is profound. For thousands of years, humans have looked at mountains as unchanging symbols of permanence. As solid as a mountain, we say, as eternal as the peaks. But that metaphor is crumbling, literally, as the mountains themselves transform before our eyes. Tabidur, vanishing glaciers. In the Alps, Himalayas, and Andes, glaciers are retreating at unprecedented rates. These aren't small adjustments. These are dramatic, visible changes that anyone can see. The Alps. Mont Blanc's glaciers have lost significant mass. The Mer de Glace, once France's largest glacier, has thinned by over 100 meters in some sections. Where ice once dominated, you now see rock and debris. The Aletsch Glacier in Switzerland, the largest glacier in the Alps, is retreating approximately 50 meters per year. Scientists predict it will lose half its volume by 2100. The Himalayas. Himalayan glaciers are melting even faster than those in the Alps. Research shows they've lost a quarter of their mass since 2000. The Khumbu Glacier, below Mount Everest, is thinning rapidly. The Khumbu Icefall, already one of the most dangerous sections of the Everest route, is becoming more unstable as the underlying glacier changes. The Andes. Tropical glaciers in the Andes are among the most vulnerable on Earth. Some have already disappeared completely. Peru has lost over 40% of its glacier area since the 1970s. Where once thick ice layers covered entire valleys, now only meltwater and debris remain. The visual contrast is stark. Old photographs show mountains covered in brilliant white glaciers. Today's images show dark rock, exposed moraine, and thin ribbons of ice where massive glaciers once flowed. Glaciers lose mass through two processes, melting at the surface and calving at the terminus, where chunks of ice break off into lakes or rivers. Both processes are accelerating. Each summer, more ice melts. Each winter, less snow accumulates to replace what was lost. The cycle is irreversible under current climate trends. Climate change is visible, measurable, undeniable. Scientists don't need complex models to show glaciers are retreating. You can see it with your own eyes. You can measure it with simple photography, comparing images taken decades apart. The evidence isn't hidden in datasets. It's written across the landscape in melting ice and exposed rock. Unstable mountains. But glaciers aren't the only thing changing. The mountains themselves are becoming unstable. Permafrost. Permanently frozen ground within the mountain structure is melting. For thousands of years, ice within cracks and fissures held the rock together like glue. Now that ice is melting and the mountains are literally falling apart. By melting permafrost, the mountain loses its structural integrity. Rock faces that were stable for millennia are now experiencing unprecedented rockfall. Entire sections of mountains are collapsing. In 2017, a massive rock avalanche in Switzerland released 3 million cubic meters of rock, one of the largest rockfalls in the Alps in recent history. The cause? Permafrost degradation weakening the mountain structure. Routes on iconic mountains like the Matterhorn and Mont Blanc are becoming unsafe. The Hernley Ridge on the Matterhorn, the normal route to the summit, sees increasing rockfall every year. Guides now avoid certain sections during warm afternoons when rockfall risk is highest. Mont Blanc's classic routes are changing dramatically. The Gouda route, the most popular ascent, crosses the Grand Couloir, a gully notorious for rockfall. As warming increases, rockfall frequency has risen, making the crossing even more dangerous. Some routes have been closed entirely. Others are only climbed during narrow weather windows when temperatures stay cold enough to keep rock faces stable. Guides and climbers must reinvent their approach each season. Routes that were safe 5 years ago are now deadly. Climbing schedules that worked historically no longer apply. Guides who've led routes for decades must constantly adapt to changing conditions. The traditional climbing season, summer months when weather is most stable, is now the most dangerous time on some routes due to warming temperatures destabilizing rock and ice. The mountains seem alive, constantly in motion, constantly changing. Where once mountains felt solid and permanent, they now feel dynamic and unpredictable. Climbers report hearing constant rockfall, seeing fresh scars on faces that were solid days before, navigating around ice that wasn't there last season. The mountains aren't just scenic backdrops, they're active, changing systems responding to warming temperatures in ways that make them fundamentally more dangerous. If you enjoy real stories from the world's most dangerous mountains, consider subscribing. New stories every week. New routes, new risks. As glaciers retreat and ice disappears, they reveal new sections of rock, creating potential new climbing routes. At first glance, this seems like opportunity. Unclimbed walls, new challenges, fresh possibilities for first ascents. But these new opportunities are dangerous. Unstable rock. Rock that's been covered by ice for thousands of years hasn't been weathered. It hasn't undergone freeze-thaw cycles that break down weaker sections. It's often loose, unpredictable, and prone to breaking. Climbers attempting these newly exposed routes report rock that crumbles under weight, holds that break off, and sections that collapse without warning. Sudden rain and falling ice. Climate change isn't just causing warming, it's making weather more unpredictable. Storms develop faster. Rain falls at higher altitudes where it once snowed. Rain on rock creates waterfalls where climbers need to ascend. It makes surfaces slippery and increases rockfall risk. And when rain falls on remaining ice, it accelerates melting and creates hazards climbers didn't need to consider before. Shorter expeditions, stricter weather windows. The window for safe climbing is narrowing. Spring arrives earlier, bringing unstable conditions. Autumn comes later, but with more unpredictable weather. The traditional multi-week expeditions to major peaks are becoming riskier. Climbers now plan shorter pushes during the most stable conditions, windows that are harder to predict and less reliable than before. The boundary between adventure and survival is narrowing. Climbing has always involved calculated risk, but when the mountain itself is changing unpredictably, calculations become unreliable. What was a reasonable risk last year might be deadly this year. Routes that were established classics are now experimental ventures onto terrain that might collapse. The modern climber must adapt to a landscape that's no longer reliable. Old guidebooks are obsolete. Route descriptions from even 5 years ago don't match current conditions. Climbers can't trust historical information. They must assess conditions fresh each time, with the knowledge that what they see today might change by tomorrow. This requires a different mindset. Not just physical skills and technical knowledge, but the ability to constantly reassess, to adapt quickly, to recognize when conditions have changed beyond acceptable risk. Pioneer, the disappearing ice. Roots. Perhaps nowhere is climate change more visible than in the disappearance of classic ice climbs. Ice climbing, once the heart of alpinism, is becoming a vanishing discipline. The great ice routes that define generations of climbers are melting away. Iconic lines that appeared in every climbing magazine, that inspired countless alpinists, that represented the pinnacle of the sport, many no longer exist. Les Droites, French Alps. The north face of Les Droites once featured stunning ice routes. Climbers traveled from around the world to attempt these classic lines. Today, many of these routes are dry. Where ice once flowed, only bare rock remains. The few ice sections that persist are thin, unstable, and dangerous. Eiger Nordwand, Switzerland. The Eiger's north face, the Nordwand, is one of alpinism's most legendary walls. While still climbed, conditions have changed dramatically. Ice fields that once provided relatively stable climbing now melt and reform unpredictably. Routes that were primarily ice climbing now involve more mixed climbing on loose rock. The mountain is fundamentally different than it was when pioneers first ascended it. Andes ice routes. Tropical ice climbing in the Andes is disappearing fastest. Routes that existed in the 1990s are completely gone. Entire ice fields have vanished. Climbers who completed these routes decades ago return to find nothing, just rock walls where ice once dominated. Ice that was thousands of years old melts in a single summer. The ice in these classic routes didn't form over years or decades. It accumulated over millennia. Some ice on high mountains is thousands of years old, a frozen record of ancient climate. But warming temperatures don't care about how long ice took to form. They melt it regardless. In extreme cases, ice that accumulated over thousands of years disappears in a single hot summer. The loss is permanent. Unlike seasonal snow that melts and reforms each year, these ice routes won't return. Even if temperatures stabilized, the ice wouldn't regrow to its previous extent. The climate that created these features no longer exists. An entire generation of climbers will never experience routes their predecessors considered essential to alpine training. The ice climbing curriculum is being rewritten as classic test pieces vanish. The end of the eternal mountains have always symbolized eternity in human culture. As old as the mountains, as unchanging as the peaks, mountains that have stood forever. These phrases reflect how we viewed mountains, as permanent fixtures, immune to the passage of time, outlasting human civilizations and individual lives. But now, mountains reveal the exact opposite. They're not eternal, they're fragile. They respond to human activity, specifically to the greenhouse gases we've released into the atmosphere. The mountains are no longer unchanging, they're mirrors reflecting our impact on the planet. Mountains as symbols of vulnerability. Instead of representing permanence, mountains now show us how quickly things can change when systems are pushed past tipping points. The ice that took 10,000 years to form melts in decades. The permafrost that held mountains together for millennia thaws and releases rock. The glaciers that shaped valleys disappear within a generation. If mountains can change this dramatically, what else isn't as permanent as we assumed? The moral dimension. For climbers, this creates an uncomfortable moral question. How do you love something that your lifestyle helps destroy? Traveling to remote mountains produces carbon emissions. Manufacturing climbing gear has environmental costs. Even the act of climbing can damage fragile alpine environments. Climbers are among the first to witness climate change impacts directly, but they're also part of the system causing those impacts. The climber's struggle is no longer just physical, it's moral. What does it mean to pursue alpinism in an era when the mountains themselves are threatened? Can you justify the carbon footprint of expeditions when you see firsthand what warming does to glaciers? These aren't abstract questions. They're dilemmas that climbers grapple with every time they book a flight to a distant range or drive to a climbing area. Some climbers are changing their approach, seeking closer objectives, reducing expedition frequency, advocating for climate action. Others struggle with the contradiction between their passion and their environmental concerns. The future of the mountains. But change isn't only loss, it's also a warning and potentially a catalyst for action. Scientists, guides, and local communities are working together. Glaciologists are measuring changes with unprecedented precision. Long-term monitoring stations track ice loss, temperature shifts, and structural changes in mountain environments. This data isn't just academic, it's being used to predict hazards, inform climbing route decisions, and provide evidence for climate policy discussions. Mountain guides, adapting. Professional guides are at the forefront of adapting to changing conditions. They're developing new route strategies, adjusting climbing schedules, and sometimes making the difficult decision to close routes that have become too dangerous. Guide associations are sharing information about conditions, creating new risk assessment protocols, and training the next generation to operate in an environment that's fundamentally different from the one previous generations knew. Local communities. People who live in mountain regions aren't just observers, they're directly impacted by these changes. Melting glaciers affect water supplies, increased rockfall threatens settlements, changes in seasonal weather patterns disrupt livelihoods. These communities are developing adaptation strategies, documenting changes, and often leading conservation efforts. The climbing culture is changing. The climbing community itself is evolving in response to these realities. There's growing emphasis on respect, treating mountains as fragile environments rather than playgrounds. Responsibility, minimizing environmental impact, supporting conservation efforts. Adaptation, learning to climb in changing conditions rather than expecting mountains to remain static. Advocacy, using the platform that comes with alpinism to raise awareness about climate change. Some climbers are choosing to focus on local objectives rather than traveling to distant ranges. Others are offsetting carbon emissions or supporting climate initiatives. Many are simply more conscious of their impact. The final message. The mountains won't disappear from maps. They'll still rise majestically. They'll still draw climbers seeking challenge and beauty, but they'll never be the same as they were. The mountains of 2050 will be fundamentally different from the mountains of 2000. Routes that exist today won't exist tomorrow. Ice that seems permanent will vanish. Rock faces that appear solid will crumble. This is the reality climbers and all of us must accept and adapt to. We're living through a transformation of the mountain environment that's unprecedented in human history. The changes we're seeing now are faster and more dramatic than at any point since the last ice age. But unlike natural climate cycles that occur over tens of thousands of years, this change is happening within a single human lifetime. Climbers who started their alpine careers in the 1980s are witnessing changes they never imagined possible. What this means for alpinism. The transformation of mountains isn't just an environmental story, it's reshaping the entire practice and culture of alpinism. Historical routes are becoming obsolete. Guidebooks are outdated almost immediately. The routes described don't match current conditions. Data from even a few years ago is unreliable. This means climbers can't depend on historical knowledge to the same degree. Every ascent becomes more exploratory, requiring fresh assessment and adaptation. Training is changing. Traditional alpinism training focused on skills needed for stable, predictable mountain environments. New alpinists must learn to operate in unstable, rapidly changing conditions. This includes assessing permafrost conditions and rockfall risk, navigating mixed terrain where ice routes have degraded, making faster decisions as weather windows narrow, recognizing when conditions have changed beyond acceptable risk. The definition of classic routes is shifting. What makes a route a classic? Traditionally, it was quality of climbing, historical significance, and the fact that it would be there for future generations. Now, some classics are vanishing. New classics are emerging on newly exposed rock. The very concept of timeless roots is being challenged. Documentation has new urgency. There's a growing sense that current climbing conditions need to be documented, photographed, filmed, described, because they won't exist in the future. Climbers are creating records of routes before they disappear. These become historical documents rather than ongoing guides. Ethics and access. As conditions change, questions arise about appropriate climbing practices. Should people continue attempting routes that are clearly becoming too dangerous? Do climbers have a responsibility to report hazardous conditions? How should the community balance desire for first ascents on newly exposed rock with awareness that this rock is unstable? These aren't easy questions, and the climbing community is still working through the answers. Final thoughts. Stand at the base of a great mountain. Look up at peaks that have stood for millions of years. They seem eternal, unchanging, solid as, well, as mountains. But look closer. See the fresh rock scars from recent rockfall. Notice the thin ice where thick glaciers once flowed. Observe the meltwater streams cutting through terrain that should be frozen. The mountains are changing, not someday, now. This isn't a future scenario we can prevent or a distant threat we might face. It's happening right now, every day, accelerating with each passing year. For climbers, this creates a unique position. They're witnesses to changes most people never see. They're experiencing losses of roots, of ice, of stability that won't be reversed in any of our lifetimes. But they're also in a position to share this message, to show the world what's happening in high places, to make climate change tangible and immediate rather than abstract and distant. The mountains won't disappear, but they'll never be the same. Future generations will climb mountains. They'll find challenge and beauty. They'll push their limits and experience profound connection with nature. But they won't climb the same mountains we climbed. They won't experience the same routes. They won't see the same glaciers or navigate the same ice fields. They'll inherit a different mountain environment, one we're creating through our choices right now. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge? Will we continue as if nothing is changing? Or will we adapt our practices, reduce our impacts, and advocate for the broader changes needed to slow these transformations? The mountains are giving us a message. They're showing us, clearly, visibly, undeniably, that our world is changing faster than most of us realize. How we respond to that message will determine what mountains look like for future generations. The peaks will still rise. The stone will still stand. But the ice, the glaciers that sculpted valleys, the roots that defined alpinism, the frozen water that took millennia to accumulate, is melting away. And once it's gone, it won't come back.